Hey, what's up, Cornerstone? Zacchaeus is a great story. Like we come to the words of the Bible and we see these things of stories and it's quaint. It's fun to have a story, but can you imagine? Like I've never had a problem being seen. Like I don't know if you can tell this if you're watching online. I'm 6'6" and just a little bit more than the average fellow in girth and weight. We don't talk about such things out loud. Jamarcus said my age out loud. I'm like, come on, man, what's going on with that? So when people start telling numbers, you can't be as young as you thought you were or as small as you thought you were. But like without fail, every time I go to the grocery store, somebody kind of like Zacchaeus will ask me to get something off the top shelf. Right? Hey, could you grab that for me? And most often it's like, because it's like 3 things back. So sure, no problem. Here you go. You know, when I was doing youth ministry, we worked with teenagers for 17 years. And without, we play this game called Sardines. It's like the reverse of hide and go seek. Anybody ever play Sardines? Right on. It's like one person goes to hide, and then everybody comes and gets around you. And the last person to find you is the next person who's it. So it didn't matter if it was sardines or hide and seek. I just had no places to hide. How do you hide this? So we always, like, if we would play, I would play in the dark. And the best hiding spot I ever found was imitating a coat rack. So we had all the lights off, and I kind of put my arms like this and hung coats and hats off of it and covered my face. Kids ran right by me, then they realized, hey, you're bigger than the coat rack. The coat racks are like poles, and I'm not. But being seen was never one of those places that was hard for me. It's when you're big, you kind of stand out. When we would go places like shopping malls or crowded areas, like my family, when the big kids were little, we would walk like a trail of ducks with Dad in the front and Mom in the back because everybody could see where Dad was in the crowd. And we would get to this space where if they ever got lost, we called it the bear paw, but I would just kind of stand and put my hand up, and the kids would, oh, there's Dad. That's where they would come to. But what if you're on the other side? I don't mean like physically, but I mean on the unseen side. Like it's easy to see people nowadays, right? I mean, all the things that happen in the world, we see them quite often, and quite often more than we want to see. And with social media, we can kind of curate our lives so that people only see what we want them to see. And we start to push these kinds of things out there so that my Facebook world only looks like life is great. Or my Instagram world, life is great, but what about the stuff that we think is unseen? What about the places in our lives where we wish somebody would see us? How do we live into those spaces? And that's the space where we become Zacchaeus today. I've shared this thought before, but when I read the Gospels and there are other people in the story, not just Jesus teaching or they're just walking along, but there's something happening, I try to let Jesus be Jesus in the story. I'm not going to be Jesus. I'm not the one who came to live and die and rise again. I didn't come to take away the sins of the world. I'm one of those people that needed his sin taken away. And so I try to read who in the story am I most like. Sometimes it's a main character, sometimes it's someone on the edge, but today I would like to invite us to be Zacchaeus as we see Jesus for being the seer of our souls, right? That's who Jesus is. Ralph Ellison wrote this fantastic volume called Invisible Man as opposed to the Invisible Man. Ellison is an African-American author. He wrote this book about a young African-American man in New York. And as he started to unfold the life of this man, the thought of the person as he begins to unfold this memoir is, I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. He would go through his day-to-day life throughout the book, and no one would pay attention to what he was doing. Ellison paints a beautiful picture of the life that I think a lot of us live on the inside. That life where people just, they don't recognize what's going on. They see us, but we're unseen. And that's where Ellison would be in this conversation of invisible man. So what does it mean to wrestle with this? What does it mean to be seen? And why is it important for Jesus to be the soul seer? Before we get into Zacchaeus' story, understand this. In the ancient world, to be seen was a necessity. Like when we think about it in the modern context, it's necessity from human survival. It exists in the most primitive parts of the human soul. When we talk about like psychology and the development of the person, there are phrases we talk about like the ancient brain or the primitive brain. And in the most recessed parts of who we are, going back to the very beginning, is this desire to be seen. Because to be seen is equated with life. If you think about this ancient dynamic, right? To not be seen was equal to being dead. And when we lived in a nomadic world before cities were established and cultures were in the developing parts, if your tribe didn't see you and you got left behind, you died. If another tribe didn't think much of you and saw beyond you, they would overrun your tribe. And you can kind of put yourself into the framework of Alexander the Great. When he started making his move across the ancient world, he would always take people from the other cultures and employ them in his army. And he slowly began to take what they had as their own established culture and erase it with the Greek way. And as he went culture to culture to culture, he just eliminated people groups, eliminated their cultural dynamics. And he forced this way of culture because he didn't see them as significant. The language that the New Testament is actually written in is called Koine Greek or Common Greek, and it comes because of Alexander's conquering of the world. It allowed for the entire world to be able to hear the message of Jesus. But the cost of that was that people were unseen and cultures were eradicated because of Alexander. And so in the core of our being is this desire to be seen. It's part of life. It's part of where we are. When we talk about Russian or Chinese orphanages, we go back into the 80s and the 90s, and as Christian groups began to go into these areas and they would watch the orphanages, children who were sitting in neglect, like they were never able to recover a healthy human development. Because at the very core places where a child was so desperately needed in the attention giving of an adult, there was no care being given. And you see the impact. You see the impact on those lives and the tensions. And that's where we fall in this dynamic of being seen. It's huge. And so we come to Zacchaeus' story and Jesus, the soul seer. So hear the word of the Lord this morning. The text reads, he entered Jericho, he being Jesus. Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Jerusalem. Remember, Easter's coming. Jamarcus was so excited, right? Easter's coming. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He enters Jericho. Now, you may not know the story, but Jericho is a pretty significant Old Testament story as well. This is a story, maybe if you've heard any of the familiar dynamics, Joshua and the armies of Israel were told to go and take over the promised land, and as they went, Jericho was one of these cities, and this ancient city was built with these massive walls that no one could get around. They were higher and thicker. How in the world are they supposed to conquer this city with these walls that are so mighty? And God instructed them just to march around the city, and as you march around the city, you're going to blow your trumpets. And they would do this, and they would pray. And finally, on one occasion, God says, now we're going to go 7 times, we're going to blow the trumpets, and the walls are going to fall. And they marched, and they marched, and they blew, and the walls tumbled. Now that sounds like the story of the 3 little pigs, doesn't it? But the power of the miracle that happened at Jericho, there's a significant piece that we see here. Because in Zacchaeus' life, the walls of condemnation and separation and judgment are about to fall at the feet of Jesus. And so Jesus enters Jericho. And as he was passing through, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able because of the crowd, since he was a short man. So running ahead, he climbed up a sycamore tree to see Jesus, since he was about to pass through. So when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because today I must stay at your house." And so he quickly came down and welcomed him joyfully. And all who saw it began to complain, "He's going to lodge with a sinful man." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, Lord. And if anyone I have extorted anything from them, I will pay back 4 times as much." And Jesus says, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost." Like all through Luke's gospel, we've been looking at that phrase, like, what is Jesus' purpose? He's come to seek and to save the lost. And we see this identity of Jesus as he's the Savior of the world, and he's coming through and he's bringing people into the good news. But there's Zacchaeus. Now let's be Zacchaeus for a moment. Like, Zacchaeus he's rich. That's a fun character to portray, right? Zacchaeus is rich. But he got his wealth by cheating other people. Okay, not so fun to be Zacchaeus anymore. And Zacchaeus, although he's rich and recognized, he's short. And the crowd, he can't see through the crowd. Have you ever gone to a parade and you got to the parade late? When we lived in Southern California, the biggest parade to go to was the Parade of Roses, for the Tournament of Roses parade. But the best place to see the floats wasn't on the parade. For the 2 days after the parade, you could go watch or see them on display and take all the time that you wanted to go walk around these immaculate floats made with all these beautiful flowers. Now, if you have pollen issues like I do, you Benadryl up and you go, right? And you go and you see these wonderful floats. And there's still a crowd, but you're not fighting to see over a crowd anymore. So we're at the parade. If you don't get there like at 3 o'clock in the morning and camp out on a cold Southern California night of about 55 degrees, right? You don't get a seat at all. But you could still see them if you knew the time and the place and when to go pay attention to the floats. So Zacchaeus looks at the crowd. He can't see over them. I think that's how it works. I've never had that problem. Sorry, it gets personal, doesn't it? But he gets ahead and he climbs a tree and he's looking down now. In my family, I typically was the tree that people wanted to climb. Dad, pick me up, And so they could see over the crowd and see what's happening. That's what Zacchaeus is doing. He's making this incredible effort to see Jesus. But why? Why does Zacchaeus need to see Jesus so badly? Like when you look through, we got a hand. It's rhetorical. We're not going to answer it right now, okay? I almost want to call on you to see what you say. But why does Zacchaeus want to see? You may have a better answer than me. Who knows? Why does Zacchaeus need to see Jesus? We're never told that in the text. But there's such a drive for him to see. We do know in Luke's gospel that there were others who wanted to see Jesus. They were fascinated by his miracles. Even the rulers of the day would say, "Hey, we've got to get this miracle maker here so we can observe what he's doing." They didn't care about what Jesus was doing to change lives. They just wanted to see him do some tricks. So is Zacchaeus in that camp? Maybe. Is Zacchaeus in the camp of the military leader whose daughter was dying? And he says, "I understand authority, and if you just command it to be, it will be." Does he have that desperation of pursuing Jesus? Like something's got to be fixed in his life? I mean, everything's working for Zacchaeus, right? He's got money, he's got a position. Like nothing in Zacchaeus' world is going to threaten him. He's the chief tax collector of the region, which means he's got other people who are doing the dirty work. He's just taking a little more off the top. So why is he so desperate to see Jesus? The text never tells us. But what the text does tell us is that Zacchaeus was seen. He was acknowledged by the crowd. I almost have this view of the passage, and this is adding a little bit of detail to it, but I almost have this view of the passage that the crowd knows Zacchaeus. They make that very clear. He's recognized in the community, and they intentionally box him out from seeing things. Like kids in a grade school class. When there's that one kid they start picking on in class on a given day, and so all the other kids, like they may be your best friend on Tuesday, but by Wednesday, for whatever reason, somebody in class has decided you get picked on that day. So all the other kids, because they don't want to get picked on either, do what the one kid says. They start to pick on you. And so the teacher's doing something and you want to see, and they box everybody out and you can't see, but everybody else can. I almost see the crowd being that kind of juvenile mindset. Oh, there's Zacchaeus. Like, let's just kind of keep in front of him and don't let him see anything. He's a sinner. The crowd recognizes it. He's going to go to a sinner's house? Like, I've lived in big cities and small towns, and man, growing up in a small town, everybody, it's like Cheers, right? Everybody knows your name and your business. They don't have to print little newspapers in small towns. Like, the good stories are already out there. Like, there's some reporting that happens, but the good stories, they happen at the coffee shop. Everybody talks. That's where Zacchaeus probably finds himself, right? He's recognized, he's acknowledged by the crowd. But that acknowledgement by the crowd still leads to rejection. That acknowledgement by the crowd still pushes him outside of anything good. And when we think about what does it mean for someone to see you, like, have you ever just been passed over by someone completely unrecognized? Like, I often have developed a habit, and some of you other taller fellows in the room may have this issue too. Like, I develop a habit where I walk with my head down. And it's not because I'm like humble. I'm not trying to oh, poor me. I'm just trying to pay attention. Because when I walk with my head up, I typically run into people. I bump them, I hit them, I don't see, like somewhere, my peripheral stops somewhere around here. It's a bad place for children to be. Especially when we're playing tag. Right? A kid goes flying across the yard, you had no idea they were there. Like, I remember in some of my most desperate places of life, I just wanted someone to see what was going on. And in those desperate places, what happened is people acknowledged me. Oh, that's Jeremy. And they acknowledged me for sports, or they acknowledged me for school, or they acknowledged something else, but they never stopped to see what was going on. I was in a world of trouble as a young man. A world of trouble. And I am pretty certain that it wasn't hard to hide. The stuff that I was into, the trouble I was causing, it wasn't hard to hide, but people only see what they want to see. And that's how we look at the world today. Maybe you feel that way. Like people only see what we want to see. And there's something within you that's being unseen, and you're going, if someone could just pay attention. Like that acknowledgement by the crowd doesn't change Zacchaeus' life. Like, all it does is add to the oppression and the disenfranchisement that he already lives under. And you're going, how in the world is a rich man oppressed? People hated him. Like the social reality of the person in the ancient world who was a tax collector was hated. Like, you woke up every morning to get dressed in his regalia, because the chief tax collector would have had regalia. That guy had to wake up and get dressed to go to work and walk through the town every day knowing that everybody hated him. Every single day. You could almost see him, if he does it all, and I don't know how good of a Jew Zacchaeus was in the ancient world. He betrayed his people as a tax collector. Did he go to temple on Friday? I don't know. If he did he go to the front of the temple for everyone to see him? Or did he kind of stay in the back? If he went at all. Because if he went to temple, guess what's going to be said? Why is he here? All he does is steal from us. Why is he here today? But something happens along that way. Like something happens in Zacchaeus' life, and Jesus shows up on the scene, and Jesus accepts him as he is. And do you take note, like Zacchaeus being who he was in that world with his wealth, with his position, with his opportunity, he could have said, hey, Jesus, come to my house today. But differently, Jesus sees him, calls him down, and says, Zacchaeus, I have to go to your house today. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to dine with you. I'm going to be in your place. There's a difference between acknowledgement and acceptance. Like we see this in family structures all the time. Like how many times do parents acknowledge their kids and then kids will talk about how they feel unaccepted by their families? Mom never paid attention. Dad never paid attention. Grandma never paid attention. Like, what is happening in here between acknowledgement and acceptance? We know the difference. And in that tribal dynamic, the peace that was there, that tribal tension, isn't that just that person was acknowledged. They were accepted into the tribe. And that acceptance was life. To be seen was the same as being alive in that ancient world. And here is Zacchaeus, who is being seen. You can almost see the picture on Jesus' face. If you could just like get the joy of the moment. The text says that Jesus calls Zacchaeus down. The crowd begins to grumble and complain. Zacchaeus says, Lord, I will do all of this. And you could just see, I get this picture of Jesus where he is just smiling like crazy in this image. Like big old toothy grin. You know? I don't know if your Jesus has long hair or kind of nappy, dusty desert hair. I don't know what your Jesus looks like, but Jesus has got a big old smile on his face in this text. Big toothy smile. Yeah, salvation has come to him today. And the disciples start to elbow each other. Hey, Jesus is really excited about this. Because they're kind of aloof sometimes. They don't get the most obvious things. And the crowd is like, are we missing something? And then Jesus makes this proclamation, like, this is why I came. I came to seek and to save the lost. And today, salvation has come to his house. High five, Zacchaeus. Right? Like Jesus meets him where he is. Come down, be here. You don't have to stay up there because this is who you are. And right here in this place, just as you are, I am receiving you and accepting you. And the acceptance of Jesus changes his life. Like we talk, like preacher talk or Christian talk is like, will you accept Jesus into your life today? Jesus accepts you. Hear that. Like whatever in life has you banged out from the crowd, whatever in life has you like climbing the tree because you can't be in this moment, but you want to see Jesus, Jesus is saying, come on, come down. Like, you don't have to change that. You got to come to me. Like coming to me changes you. Not you changing you, then coming to me. Like the acceptance of Jesus changes everything. And we see these powerful words that start to unfold. But the tragedy today is that even in hearing how salvation came to Zacchaeus, for us, we are too worried about everyone else's approval that we miss God's acceptance. We are so busy worried about what everybody else thinks that I miss the acceptance of God that's being invited to me right now. And that's tragic. If Zacchaeus had let the crowd dictate the moment, how many excuses would he have made with Jesus to come out of the tree? If Zacchaeus had allowed the crowd to dictate the moment, would he have even gone to the tree to begin with? But there was something. There was something so driving about Jesus that Zacchaeus had to see him. And then he's seen. I don't know where your life is today. I can't read into the soul. Whether you're here or you're there on the screen. Like, what is it in your soul that is keeping you from receiving God's perfect acceptance? And we can make all the excuses. I'm not good enough. I'm too old. I'm not this. I'm not that. And we start to build all these different kinds of reasons for why we shouldn't come to Jesus. And we will tell God, you can't accept me. You don't know what I've done. Yes, he does. He knows. God knows. Like, if you have been in this room or you've been online with us for a minute, you know, like, regularly I reflect on a passage from Romans that reminds us, while we were still God's enemies, the most unacceptable position in life, somebody's enemy, Jesus died for the ungodly. Jesus is challenged and he's talking and he says, rarely will we give our lives over for a good person. For a brother, someone that we're related to, someone that we love, but to give your life for an enemy. And that's who we were before God. That's where we stand. And yet through that, God breaks down every wall, every reason, every excuse that we would give to not receive his acceptance. He's going, you got to come just as you are right now to this spot. This is where I'm here to meet you. Come out of the tree. Stop making excuses. And we start to think about who God is. But it's the kindness of Christ. Like, imagine like the gentleness and the compassion of Jesus to be like Zacchaeus. Come down. I need to stay in your house today. Jesus could have stayed anywhere. Like, any one of those people in the crowd would have gladly received Jesus into their home. And yet it's Zacchaeus where Jesus goes, I have to stay with you. In Romans again, Paul writes, do you presume upon the richness of his grace? And this is that spot where we often tell God what God can and can't do. We presume upon who God is. And then Paul would say, do you not know then? Do you presume upon the richness of his grace? Or do you not know that it's his kindness that leads you to repentance? Like, we will pray for our loved ones that God would do something drastic in their lives, and that typically means something not positive, to cause them to see him in a way they haven't yet. But the way of Scripture says, it is the kindness of God that leads us to repentance, not the lightning bolt. And we see that unfold in Zacchaeus' life. Like, there are times when we are so afraid of God, we're so afraid because our sin is so whatever big, that we think God would surely hate us, even though he says he loves us in spite of that, that we presume upon God and we wait for him to zap us instead of loving us. And yet it's the kindness of God that brings us, and it's that same kindness that motivates us to change. You ever listen to people when like they go to the doctor and the doctor tells them, like, you got high blood pressure and you got high cholesterol and your heart's not looking good and this could happen and that can happen, and all that fear starts to overlay, and then the doctor without fail will give them a low sodium diet plan. Eat a bunch of chicken breast and broccoli with no flavor to it whatsoever, and you're going to be okay. But if you don't change, if you continue eating those cheeseburgers every week, I'm going to put you on pills. And then we go home and we fret and we worry and we wring our hands and we think about the insurance and the medical bills and we start to complain. And then we look at the diet plan and go, chicken and broccoli. Ugh. And we put it down and we keep eating cheeseburgers until we see the doctor on a different form of the table. And then what? Why is fear and information not enough to motivate us to change? But then you see some people who they're like, oh, because of my wife and my kids and my grandkids, I'm going to eat the chicken and broccoli. Love is a greater motivator. Like fear will motivate you so far, but love is a greater motivator for change. So why do we wait for God to zap us when he's already poured his kindness out and says, guys, come to the better way? And that's where Zacchaeus finds it. Like Jesus sees him, he restores him to life. He restores Zacchaeus, and we start to see right there on the streets of Jericho, the walls begin to fall. The walls that he had built in his life, Zacchaeus, that alienated him from his community, that distanced him from relationship with others, that betrayed his life with God. And there on the streets, we see life happen. And just like that, the greatest miracle of all time, dead things come alive. Paul would remind us that outside of Jesus, you were once dead in your sin. The greatest miracle of Jesus still happens today when dead hearts come alive in him. So what about us today? What about you today? Like, what is it in your life where God is inviting you to him, to see him, to live into his incredible kindness that walks alongside and says, I have come to be with you? Jesus is the soul seer. And as he looks into your life, he constantly invites you to a better way. Not a way of lightning bolts and judgment, a way of kindness and opportunity that says, let's go. Let's do life together. Let me lead you. Follow me. Those are the words of Jesus. And that's where we find Zacchaeus in us, even if it's just a little bit.